Okay, we're live here at HQ at Eagle Street. So welcome everyone to our meet and eat with Outback Futures, which will be really good. I'd just like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, and we pay our respect to their elders past to present. And I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples here today. Actually, I don't need my glasses, so I'll put them there. I'd like to welcome Brent Sweeney here from Outback Futures. Brent's the CEO. You put Brent in my mind now. Brent's the CEO there. And I'd like to welcome all the workplace givers that are here with us live. Thank you very much for attending and out there, because obviously Outback Futures won the Outshout Workplace Giving Grant of $25,000, which is pretty much exactly what our workplace givers donate each year, which is great. So I'll do a quick overview of Outback Futures and why they got the grant, I suppose, in the first place. Look, they're really committed to providing health services to rural, regional, and remote Queensland. They do this through providing allied health, so physios, OTs, speech pathologists, psychologists. Brent will obviously speak a lot more about this. And they go into rural communities and assist in those areas. They do a lot more, which again, Brent will talk about. But what we really liked is, obviously, we look at healthcare for vulnerable Australians, education for at-risk youth, and then rural, regional, remote. And Outback Futures really ticked all those boxes, because the stuff that we're funding is actually working with kids and kids with, I suppose, some learning disabilities and issues there. And these guys go out into their community where they don't have the speeches that they need, they don't have the OT, and do a great job at helping them. And then use technology once they come back and continue supporting them through tele-health. So we really love the fact that they were able to tick those three boxes and do it really well. So today would just be like any normal meet and eat, where Brent will have a chat, we'll ask a few questions, and then at the end we'll get you guys to ask some questions. And obviously online, you can do that through the chat box or a page. They can put their hand up at the end and we'll take the questions. So my first question to you, though, before we get into what Outback Futures is who are you? So how did you get in this job as CEO of such a great organisation? Oh, you got them.
You've got a mic here. Yeah. Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity, and great to be here. Yeah, I got involved with Outback Futures, I suppose, when I loved the bush. I grew up on, in a rural setting, and I've always loved the farm, love the land. So that's kind of been in my blood. And I got this opportunity. I knew the founder of Outback Futures, and she sort of came knocking. So it wasn't overly complicated. They do great work, and I've got very much a community services background. And when she came knocking and said, "Hey, do you want to come and give us a hand at Outback Futures?" I said, that sounds great. And so that's kind of how it worked out. It wasn't much more complicated than that. Than, "Hey, do you want to go and do some great work with some great people in remote areas?" And I said, "Yep, I'm up for that."
Well, it sounds like it. That's a very, very good job. I think my small trips to regional Queensland, it's just such a magical place, and the more support we can give the people out there, the better. So tell me a few key things about Outback Futures. So what are the key, I suppose, services you provide and the people that you help?
Yeah, so we work only in very remote parts of Queensland, so as remote as you can get, basically. And we're really formed because a lot of the people who are out there, they would face the same challenges that we face. If you're a kid in remote Queensland, or an adult or whatever, that's facing some mental health or some developmental challenges in your life, it's no different than people in here facing those same challenges, except that your outcomes are going to be much worse. And a lot of that has to do with less access to the services and help and support that you would need. So we provide a whole range of allied health services, from psychology and counselling through to OT and speech therapy. And we do that right across, some of those remote parts of Western Queensland. And it's not that others aren't there doing it. The government obviously has their bit to play as well, but often, jobs go unfilled. So there's massive gaps in service delivery. And there's also communities that are not in very good habits in terms of help seeking. So they're so used to not being able to get help that they've almost given up in lots of ways. So it's both turning up consistently with good quality staff, which we do have, and then trying to help those communities realise that there are ways of getting support. Yeah.
So to me, I really loved your model, which is really working with the community to develop a solution for the community. So can you talk us through how that happens?
Yeah. So we only go into the communities that we're invited into. And obviously we've got our teams of people, and we've got our allied health service providers, but we also have some leadership capacity in those teams, and they're more community development leaders. They're our region leads who will go and do a lot of engagement with, a lot of listening and co-design with our local communities. So in that way, we're not trying to double up. We'll fill gaps or meet needs that are being met, but also we want to have a broader conversation with the community. How do we help build wellbeing capacity into that community so that the challenges that they're facing now, they'll be less likely to face them in 10 or 20 years' time? And some of those things are pretty obvious, but like most of us, we need reminders to invest into our health, and we need to do that over an extended period of time and in a way that works for remote communities who don't have all the things that we might have in the city.
Excellent. So our grant is Longreach and Cloncurry.
Yep.
So what does that mean to those communities? So I mentioned that the team will visit. Can you sort of give us an overview of a visit and then the follow-up post those visits?
Yeah. So we recruit our teams to local communities or to local government areas. So we've got a Longreach team, which services that council area. We've got a Cloncurry team. We've got others as well. And that team of people is dedicated to that area. So they're not fly in, fly out, where they might go there and then have a few weeks off and not be contactable. And they're not like a traditional outreach team that might go to Longreach one day, and then Winton, and then Cloncurry, and then they're not thinking about the people. They're focused on those communities and those people the whole time. So they'll fly in, might spend a week there in clinic mode. They'll do a bunch of appointments. They'll go to the school and work with kids who are challenging. They'll have appointments across all of those disciplines across the whole community, and they work pretty hard. They do pretty big days, and often, I was in Winton with a different team a few weeks ago, and one of the speeches was seeing like 10 people today and whatever tomorrow. And I'm going, oh man. And they get back on the Qantas Link flight back to Brisbane, and the eyes are hanging out of their head because they really want to maximize that time in the community. And then when they're back here, they'll turn back up at work on Monday the next week, and they'll be seeing some of those same clients, but over telehealth. So it's a really consistent service, and they get the best of both worlds, where they get to understand the local context. Our team knows what a drought looks like. They know what it means to drive 4 hours and, not get anywhere. They know what it means to have rain come through and all of a sudden you can't get off your property and get to town for that appointment. They understand all of that kind of a context. But because they're not living there, they're not running into the small town confidentiality issues, because no one wants to run into their psychologist at the pub or at the LGA or wherever in town. And so often it's a very awkward sort of environment for allied health people to live and work over a long period of time in those small communities. So we call it our work in, work out model. They'll work in the community and they'll work with that community, but from outside of it. So it's that real quality, consistent care over a long period of time.
And like the schools, for example, must love you coming into those communities. I assume you've got great relationships with quite a lot of those service providers within that local area.
Yeah, the schools love us. And again, it's not that Queensland Education isn't trying to do a good job, but there's often gaps, and they'll often recruit workers or deploy staff based on population. So you might have a guidance officer that comes through that school once a term to see kids, and it becomes very difficult for them to achieve a whole lot. So yeah, we love going, and they love having us come there. You build those real consistent relationships with the teachers, which is good for them. They're more likely to stay and do a longer stint if they feel a bit supported and they're not like the only resource. And yeah, we get to go and hang out with the kids and do that work on a regular basis as well. So we've quickly become, some of our team would have become some of the most consistent long-term workers in those communities pretty quickly, because there's normally pretty high turnover.
Yeah, and your model sounds great. Is it a model that, this is sort of off topic, that you think needs to be replicated within government and other sort of service providers?
Yeah, we'd like to think so, because often, what's not working in the bush, the city models that rely on big populations and regular turnover, a lot of those things don't work in remote communities. And so we think our structure and some of the learnings absolutely should be replicated and looked at and adopted into other providers and government services. And the bush is just, some of the outcomes in the bush, suicide rates in remote places like Longreach can be 4 or 5 times higher than they are here in the city. They'll experience the same amount of mental health challenges, but the outcomes are 4 or 5 times worse. Like some of the developmental delays in kids. There can be up to 40% of kids going into school with significant developmental challenges, and they're just, you know, if you're a mum here in Brisbane and you go to a play group or go to a kindy or something, you run into another mum and you have a chat, what's going on, and all of a sudden you're figuring out, hey, maybe my kid needs some help, or there's a screening program that'll pick that up before they even get to kindy or whatever. A lot of those things are just very difficult if you live an hour or two from town. There's just not the population to have all of those base level of kind of interactions and support that often then lead to help. So your kid can go on a very different trajectory depending on where you live, through no fault of the parents or lack of willingness to want to help, just, you know, just the nature of the environment. Yeah.
The connections
and all those things. Yeah.
Key. So what are the people in the bush telling you that they need? So I assume a lot of communities are different. So the needs of Cloncurry are different to Longreach and things like that. But is there any sort of overarching themes that they're wanting help in? Or
yeah, I mean, obviously in all of the sort of service deliveries, there's wait lists and constant needs to be consistent in that place. One of the things that we've really noticed in the last couple of years is we've really listened and talked a lot with communities is the challenges that they're facing at a community and social level. So we'll work with individuals, but we also want to try and help communities think about their long-term health and trajectory. And, you know, we know the bush has been declining in terms of population and experiencing a whole range of challenges, but that puts enormous pressure on the social connectedness and glue that helps hold a community together. There's less people. They're probably working a lot harder on their jobs. Some people even in town will be working 1, 2 and 3 jobs just because the workforce challenges are so immense. Getting people to go and help run the cafe in Longreach is really hard. So you get people running 2 jobs. So they're running a lot harder, and therefore your volunteer base to keep some of the basic community infrastructure and groups going is not there. And so one of the big challenges is how do we help those communities to rethink or to work through what does it mean to be healthy? How do we stay connected? How do, you know, the CWA that's been going for 100 years can't run anymore because we don't have the volunteers, or the Scouts Club or the Lions Group, they're struggling to keep going, or whatever it is that actually helps hold those communities together and really buffer them against some of the challenges. The chair of our board, Peter, he runs a couple of properties at Longreach, but he was saying, you know, like 20 years ago, you know, I'd go and share the sheep with my neighbour and then he'd come and help share my sheep. And but now that's all done by contractors. So that sense of working with your neighbours and working on stuff together that really forms tight bonds and helps build that, you know, that connection and buffers the mental health challenges often not there. And he said, it was interesting. He said, the only time in recent memory I can remember sort of rallying together as a community was when the bushfires came through. And we all got together and we fought on someone's property because it was going to hit our property eventually anyway. So, but he said, apart from that kind of standout and unique, you know, experience, that idea of really working together and connecting and knowing my neighbour and all of those things that are really important for healthy relationships and community, but they're not as common, you know.
I suppose that's happening though here in the city as well, isn't it? And
correct.
COVID was a great example of, you know, people actually having to come together because the only person you could speak to was your neighbour.
That's right. Exactly right. And I think in the bush, they just got some unique challenges because of the geography. I was talking to a guy at Winton and he said, you know, 30 or 40 years ago, we used to always socialise locally. Every property would have a tennis court and every weekend we'd go and play tennis in a little tournament at someone's property. He said, now the roads are so good, which no one's going, oh, we should have worse roads. But he said, now my kids, they can hop in their car and drive 4 hours to see a mate somewhere at another town and spend the weekend then and then come back. He said, we could never do that. So we were forced to build these really local, strong, connected communities with our families and our kids and all of that. Whereas now it's amazing how over time, different dynamics can have maybe even unintended consequences. And
So you haven't got a crystal ball, but the future of the bush in your eyes, is it good? Is it strong? Is it going to still be vibrant, or is it dying a bit of a slow death?
I don't think it's dying. I think it's shifting, because I think if you think about the bush, there's a lot of great things going. They're great-hearted people, you know. They're innovators, so they're really practical, and they'll come up with lots of solutions. If you think about some of the great businesses in Australia, you know, Qantas was birthed in the bush. You know, so some of the great things that we have, even as a nation, were actually imagined and set forth from these remote communities. So they're very innovative and very practical. There's actually enormous wealth in some parts of the bush. There's some very wealthy people who have got great resources and big properties in those sorts of places. The challenges are in a digital world with declining populations, and that there's a sense, I think, of reinvention that's required. So I don't think it's dying. I just think it's shifting and moving in new ways. And I think when you're in that transition sort of mode, but there's a lot of optimism in lots of places, and I know that can be a bit seasonal. But Australia, I don't know about those of you who live in the city, but we have a bit of a romantic love affair with the bush as well. Like I think there's part of lots of us that like to think we're still a bush nation, and that we, that we're only ever a generation from coming off the land, and we've all got our akubras. And
I love my akubra.
Yeah, exactly right. So there's that sense in which that's part of our cultural identity. And so I think it's important to try and figure out how do we help it to thrive and survive, not just for the sake of it, but for our holistic identity as a nation. I think we lose something in our Australian soul if we all just end up living in 5 coastal cities, and so I think it's an important project to figure out how we might support and help that. But I think those communities are full of great people who are probably well ahead of us on thinking through those things too.
Oh, it was interesting. So that the people who do the workplace giving get to choose what area the grant goes to.
Yeah.
And overwhelming, it was rural, regional, and remote support.
Yeah.
So, and the number of people I got emails from, oh, this is great. I came from the bush, or I came from a regional town.
Yeah.
So it'd be great to do something back in it. And I find it very interesting, actually, when I first started working at Heritage, a number of people, Heritage was my first bank account, because I didn't even know they were from Toowoomba, but they were, so obviously there's a lot of people, like you said, 1 generation, 2 generations away from a rural, regional, remote type.
Yeah, that's right.
Type thing. I'm going to throw it open to any questions that anyone might have about Outback Futures and the work that they do.
Just one question from you. You mentioned that you go away when invited. So how do these rural communities get to the citizens?
Okay, I might just say that so everyone can hear it. So we go where we're invited, so Outback Futures. How does the rural communities actually get to know about your services?
Mainly through the bush telegraph. Most bush communities are very well connected. You'd be very surprised about how people know what's going on across remote areas. And so we might run into a mayor from one, a neighbouring region or a neighbouring town, and all the mayors, they've got all of their alliances and their connections. They all talk all the time and they support each other. Or it might be a school principal that has heard something that's happening in another school and says, hey, we'd love you to come and work with us in our school. So there's no one way that it works, but it's normally a significant sort of opportunity that sort of pops up. It might be on the back of a disaster. We got invited into some parts of northwest Queensland on the back of the 2019 monsoon floods that went right through sort of that northwest area, and flooding again at the moment up in some of those parts. So we think of them, but we got invited to go and could you come and help respond? So it might be that, or it might be a critical incident. There's a suicide or a real tragic death in an area, and someone goes, hey, would you come and lead a critical incident response? So it kind of starts in a whole lot of different ways, but for us, we want to go where we're working with communities. We're not coming to fix them. We're not coming to solve their problems. We're not coming as the silver bullet consultant from Brisbane to try and tell them what to do, because as you might imagine, people from the bush kind of bit over that, and that's not how we want to operate. So it doesn't really matter where it starts, but we want to come in response to communities wanting us to be there.
And flying on from that, I suppose I've got a question now, which I did think about when we did the grant. How many communities are missing out on you, for example? So if you got written a $5 million check tomorrow, how many communities in Queensland, would need your services that aren't getting it, do you think? What's your gut feel on that?
Yeah, well, we only work in what's classified as remote and very remote areas. So there's 21, for example, there's 21 councils in the Western Alliance of Councils. So from sort of the border of Queensland right to the tip, that are in those remote areas. And that's most councils west of the Great Dividing Range. We're sort of really fully embedded in 5 or 6 of those. We're probably touching 9 or 10 of those in some way. Yeah. So we could easily double or more what we're doing, really. Yeah. And and still not be maybe touching every community in Queensland. So yeah, if we got written a $5 million check from Heritage or whatever, maybe that maybe when you rebrand,
I didn't mention that. I didn't mention that at all.
So when you're doing the rebranding, and you're going to come up with a new name and you want to get it everywhere, maybe it could be the whatever, anyway, just
I didn't bring it up.
no.
I've got witnesses here. I've got witnesses.
Look, there's a lot of providers, NDIS providers out of Brisbane servicing a number of those communities. Why aren't there enough of those that you have to step in and provide more support? Why is that not working?
So NDIS providers in Brisbane going out to service these areas.
Yeah.
Why is there still a need then if they've got those happening for someone like Outback Futures?
Yeah, so NDIS is obviously a funding mechanism, and then you've still got to actually get access to those things. So, for example, last year I was with a family in Boulia, which is 4 hours west of Winton, which is 2 hours north of Longreach, which is 1100 k from here. So you do the numbers in terms of getting to Boulia. It's probably, I'm going to say, it's probably 12 hours drive from Rockhampton, and they were accessing an occupational therapist from Rockhampton, and just, had tens of thousands of dollars of package money sitting in their bank account, couldn't spend it because couldn't get it, even though there's, so part of it's still about access and the number of people that could actually be available to provide those services. They're not as widespread. So they might be in places like Emerald, where there's a significant population 4 hours from Rocky, or they might be in Roma, where there's another centre and you can fly in and out of, and it's only, but if you go another 6 or 10 hours further west, then those numbers drop off. The other thing is that it's actually not one of the big issues with NDIS in remote areas is getting the assessments done that are required to access the funding. So you need to be approved or assessed to get a level of assessment, which then determines obviously your package funding, which then you can go and use to, and that bit of assessment can be quite expensive and quite hard to get done anywhere. And there's a massive challenge if you're living in remote areas of even getting that assessment bit done. So there's a few, it's largely practical reasons, and it's even if you can find people or if there's funding, can't always find the people to get it done. Yeah.
Can you speak specifically a little bit what Heritage, what our grants?
Yeah, sure.
So what our grant's going to be providing?
Yeah, great. So your grant is going to be helping us to run clinics and that follow-up work in both Longreach and Cloncurry. So that will allow us to run a number of clinics in both of those centres over a year, to fly people in, to pay their wages and travel costs or whatever, and deliver those services, and then to provide the follow-up work online. So it'll fund some of the actual logistical work, but also some of the actual clinician time to actually, to do the work.
Focused on the kids.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yep.
So as in learning development, or just everything? Any specific area that we're planning to work with the kids in?
I can't remember.
It was children with learning development issues.
So it'll be around our speech pathology work, our occupational therapy work, and we work quite holistically with the family as well. So we might be seeing a kid because they've got some learning development challenges, but sometimes those challenges are actually caused because of other trauma or issues going on in their family. So it's actually a bit counterproductive to sit there and try and help this kid to learn to read or to work on their speech, because the problem is actually over there at home, or something that's happened over there that's caused trauma. And, so then we might have our counsellor go and work with that family to deal with that issue, which, hey, that actually makes this problem a lot more manageable or get solved a lot quicker. So it's part of our multidisciplinary team. We work in a sort of a case conference sort of model where our practitioners are really trying to work together across a community, across families to solve some of those.
That's one of the things we really liked. It wasn't funding one area, it was funding a team. And I think obviously if you have that team, you've got a greater chance of success when you're looking at the whole package rather than just a single part of it. So all the allied health workers that work in and out based in Brisbane.
Mostly, we've had them in Bundaberg, there's some on the Sunshine Coast. We haven't had one that moved to Canberra and kept working with us. You know, so they would come to Brisbane and go on a clinic and then go home. So in some ways, most of them are here within the southeast kind of corner, but yeah, not all of them.
Yeah. So actually, the headquarters are just a stone's throw away at
Wollongabba,
not far from the Gabba there. So not far from obviously this office.
Yeah.
Not Heritage Stadium, but the Gabba.
And that model is really important around workforce for a couple of reasons. One of the massive challenges in the bush is actually professional workforce. So it's not just allied health, it's teachers, it's anything really. And one of the great advantages, obviously, I talked about the small town confidentiality issue of not running into your practitioner in the street, but equally getting people to move to Cloncurry or to Longreach to take up a job is part of the reason why there's often significant service gaps. You know, you can say, oh yeah, we've got a job and it's in Longreach, but if it goes unfilled for 6 or 12 or 18 months, then it's not. So we find that there are a lot of people who have either maybe grown up in the bush, maybe they've come and started a career in Brisbane or whatever, but they'd like to give back or work, or a lot of people who might be in a job with Queensland Health and they want to work a couple of days with us and do something remotely as well. So it actually is proven to be a really good way of attracting great clinicians to do great work without having to get them to move to the bush in order to do that. So we think that's a really good little innovation. And we kind of stumbled across it actually. Like if you talk to our founder, she would go, well, back when we first started, we assumed that we would eventually have people working in Longreach or in Cloncurry. But as we designed our model and listened and worked with communities, they would say, oh, we love it when you come, but we love it when you leave. We know we can get you anytime on the phone or on a screen. So you get great quality, consistent service, but we're not going to run into you. So that's actually a little dynamic that's developed over time as we've gone and listened and co-designed even our fundamental approach with the communities that we're in.
Excellent. Okay, so we're lucky to have volunteer leave here at Heritage. How would that go if employers gave it in Longreach, for example, and staff helping out their staff?
Oh, you mean Heritage staff?
No. I think Joe means the staff in Longreach if they had a volunteer day.
So like any worker in Longreach, if they had a volunteer day,
how could they help?
How could they help? Well, probably not so much directly with us in one sense, because obviously there's significant confidentiality issues and stuff with people lobbing up and working with us because there's client, confidentiality and things. But one of the things that we actually do is we've talked a lot about our allied health service delivery, like running a counselling session or an OT session or whatever. But the other big part of what we do is to work with local communities to help empower them to run wellbeing sessions. So, there's a great story, for example, in Barcaldine where one of our teams works, and there's this lady who we did some work with, and she runs a local fitness business, PT business. And she said, what I want to do is actually help my clients in my community to improve their general wellbeing. It's good that they're doing exercise, but what can we do for their mental health and wellbeing more generally? And so one of our psychologists worked with her to design a little 8-week program that, so her clients, and she had 12 of her clients signed up for it, and they'd come in each week and they'd do an activity around their mental health. And over the 8 weeks, they did this little course. So for us, it's not just about how do we do what we do in terms of delivering, but how do we help empower local people to think, what can I do to improve the well-being of the people that I live with? So in some ways, it's probably more important that we help local people get activated in, we talk about people putting a well-being lens on, that they might already be doing a bunch of things that are in their job or in their life, but if they put a mental health or a well-being lens over that, what could they do? And when we were talking about this, the local postie goes, oh, that makes complete sense to me. He said, I drive and drop off the mail to all the properties, and we drive down these roads, and obviously the driveways could be kilometres long. They just throw it in the letterbox at the front of the driveway and then keep going around. He said, what if I drove up each driveway once a month and put the mail on the front porch with the hope that I might actually run into somebody, have a cup of tea and a bit of a chat, You can't do that every day,
No.
and it didn't really change his job. He's driving past anyway. But if he did one driveway each month, or each driveway each month, then you could have some really important conversations, because we know, for example, that having really good social connections and relationships is a really important part for our overall well-being. We all know that, that's actually a true thing. So having a little check or a little way of connecting could unlock, who knows, any significant thing for people who might be struggling. So that was just him putting a lens over his everyday activity to think about how he might improve the well-being of others in the community.
Oh, great idea. And I'm sure he'll get lots of scones. And
Exactly.
cups of tea and
He'll probably
slices.
yeah, he'll have some weight challenges, won't he?
Have to join a gym after that one.
Yeah.
But great idea. Any final questions before we say thanks?
What do you, I'm big on measuring impact, of being former I do. How do you define yours as successful? So do you go, well, every day we're reaching more people, or you're finding is that other people you're currently connecting with are proving, and you find that that service is actually making a difference? So how do
Yeah.
you,
So the question is, how do you define success really, and how do you measure your impact?
Yeah. At an individual level, that's obviously really easy. If we're doing a counselling session with someone, for example, then we've got measurements that we do. We'll measure their improvement over the time, or if we're doing a session with a kid, they'll have an assessment, and then we'll do a bunch of work, and then we can see that they're now operating here when they started here. So we
it could
could
be good that they're dropping because they're actually helpful. They don't need to actually be seeing anyone.
exactly right. So we've got all those measures where we then can aggregate up all of our work from individuals that we see. So we're quite okay at measuring the impact of the service delivery side of what we do. We are working at the moment actually to figure out how do we more accurately measure the more general well-being impact in the community. So you can imagine if the local postie and the local PT operator, you can imagine if there were 10 initiatives like that in the local community, then over time you would expect that the well-being of that community would go from here to here. And we're actually in the middle of an evaluation bit of work at the moment to figure out how do we more accurately measure that bit, because that's actually a bit more probably powerful and culture changing in the long term, but a little bit harder. We've got lots of great stories of people who have been transformed by that kind of stuff. Not so much great impact data around that at the moment.
And it's
Yeah.
very, very hard. Like, obviously we work with a lot of charities, and, instinctively, the impact, and but to actually have that percentage of 60% happier or whatever it might be it's tough.
Yeah, but it's really important for us because we say that's actually probably the key part of what we want to do long term, that that communities are actually empowered. And so we'll have a mayor in one of our regions say, Outback Futures has transformed the way that my community thinks about mental health and the way so we know when you get local leaders like saying, so we know that there's actually a real impact and you can kind of see it. Getting the data on that is a particular challenge that we are working hard on at the moment. Yeah.
So challenges with GPs and allied health, and then solutions to, I suppose, health services in the bush.
Yeah, so that we get a lot of referrals from GPs and work with them pretty closely. One of the big stats that's a problem in the bush, particularly around mental health, not so much around some of the stuff that we do with kids in terms of speech and whatever, but in mental health in the bush, is that there's a really high percentage of medicated people. So they'll go to their GP for help or whatever, and the GP, there's nowhere to refer them to. So they'll be medicated. So we'll help your depression and your anxiety with some medication, which, it's not great, obviously, in the long term, because it's not treating the actual cause. So there are all of those challenges and shortages. How to improve that scenario? We think our work in, work out model is one way that can actually really work to improve that. So we don't have to get every allied health person moving to the bush to be able to offer a service. Tele-health has made some massive inroads into that, and I think that's improving. But I don't think there's any silver bullets in all of that. I think government need to really invest in some of those innovative solutions that we feel like we've stumbled across, and see how they can be evaluated and then maybe scaled. So I think there's some opportunities around technology that we should be investing in as a broader sector, but I'm not sure there's any silver bullet or easy answers in that. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. So the time cycles from the visit. So how often would they be out there and what's the follow-up time when they come back?
Yeah, so we wouldn't be out there monthly with our teams, but we'd be out there a number of times a year. And it's a bit different for different clinicians. Sometimes people go more regularly than others, sometimes less regularly, but we would be in the community probably 6 to 8 times a year in some form in each of those communities. And then each of our clinicians would be out there a few times a year. And then obviously the follow-up cycles could be weekly, it could be fortnightly, it could be monthly. And some of that depends on the therapy and support that's needed. So, you know, we might see a person that needs counselling work. We might start seeing them weekly, and then that might go obviously decrease and hopefully go back to nothing over time. We might go to a community. So that Winton story I was telling earlier, our speechie was out there doing a whole bunch of assessments for kids that were about to go into school. So a whole lot of screening kind of assessments. And we do a lot of that assessment type work face-to-face, but then we'll do a lot of therapy work in follow-up. So we might see that kid, do an assessment, they need this work, we'll put a package together and see them. We might see them weekly, and often we do that as a weekly cycle for a block of therapy, and then they'll be okay, or they'll have a break and then maybe come back. So it really varies depending on the scenario, the discipline of, that we're offering, and what the client needs, and also what's realistic and what's affordable from our point of view as well, in terms of being able to try and keep that equitable across the community.
Okay, look, a massive thanks for today. Look, we really like what you do. Obviously, you received the highest grant that we've got. I think the work that you do in building those communities and working with those communities, and I suppose using their lived experience is really important, I think, to get the right solution. So hats off to you for doing that. To our workplace givers out there, so do I look down the lens there? I'll look at this audience first, and then down the lens to our workplace givers. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Your support is great. As you can see, we try and get whatever you donate each year straight out the door to a charity such as Outback Futures. And I hope today you've got a better insight into the impact you're helping achieve. So thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you.
Have a great afternoon, guys. Cheers.